A billionaire's lawyer steps out of a black Escalade, holds up
Sir,
a photograph, and asks the homeless man under the bridge
do you
a
know who you
single
really
question.
are?
The man doesn't answer. His eyes drift past the lawyer and land on the black waitress 3 feet away, frozen, a foil-wrapped sandwich warm in her hand. Her name is Hazel Davenport, and for 11 months, she has been feeding this man, along with 4 others, under the West 25th Street overpass in Cleveland. She never asked his name or why he was there, because none of it mattered to her. Meanwhile, her rent is 3 weeks late, her mother's insulin ran out Sunday, and she has $11 to her name. Tonight, the stranger will look at her and change her life forever, because kindness keeps receipts. It's 7:14 a.m. at Galloway's Diner on Cleveland's west side, and the bell above the door hasn't stopped ringing since 6. Hazel moves between booths like she was born inside the rhythm. Coffee pot in her left hand, order pad tucked into her apron. A smile she's worn so long it doesn't cost her anything anymore. "Morning, Mrs. Ruthie. 2 eggs scrambled, wheat toast, decaf?" The old woman slides 3 quarters across the counter, her tip, and Hazel pockets them without blinking. "Best tip I'll get all day." Behind the pass window, Danny Brennan, the 24-year-old fry cook who is permanently flour-dusted and permanently in love with her, leans on the counter. "You working a double again?" Hazel doesn't slow down. "Mama's insulin copay went up." Danny opens his mouth. She cuts him off with a look. He closes it. This is Hazel Davenport's life. 12-hour shifts, 3-quarter tips, a mother at home with a swollen left foot, and a fridge that hums louder than it cools. But to understand why she does what she does under a certain overpass at midnight, you have to go back 4 months to a rainy Tuesday when she was closing up alone and saw a man across the street leaning against a dumpster, bearded, navy jacket soaked through, not begging, not moving. She watched him a full minute before she grabbed the meatloaf tray her manager had ordered thrown out, wrapped a portion in foil, and crossed the wet asphalt. "Here." He didn't take it. He looked at her like he'd forgotten how to be offered something. "It's gonna get thrown out anyway," she lied. "You'd be doing me a favor." He took it. His hand was shaking. His nails were clean. That was the detail she noticed. His nails were clean. And she walked away before he could thank her, because something in his face looked like thanks would break him. By the second week, there were 3 of them under the West 25th Street overpass. By the second month, 5. There was Miss Corrine, 60-something, who used to cut hair in Glenville until her landlord sold the building out from under her. There was Walter, who carried a whiskey bottle he never opened because "the day I open it is the day I'm done." There was the young couple, Tasha and Rico, who lost their apartment when Rico's factory shut down. And there was the bearded man in the navy jacket who never gave a name, the one Hazel called, only in her own head, Mr. Blue. She brought food on Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, Saturdays. Whatever her manager marked for the dumpster. Sometimes a thermos of coffee she paid for out of her own tips. She never asked any of them why they were there, because her mother had already answered that question for her a long time ago. Loretta Davenport, 58, always said it the same way. On Sunday nights, across a chipped glass of sweet tea, the way other mothers said grace. "You remember what I told you about your daddy?" And Hazel would set down her fork because she knew what was coming. "Somebody fed him when he was on the street, after the army, before he came home to us." Her mother's voice never trembled on this part. "Some woman I'll never meet kept your daddy alive for 3 weeks of his life. Long enough for him to come home. Long enough for you to exist. I don't know her name. I don't know her face. I owe her everything. So when you see somebody hungry, baby, you feed them. Not because they earned it. Because somebody did it for us." Then Loretta would cover her daughter's hand with her own and finish the way she always finished. "The world don't notice waitresses, baby, but God does. And God keeps a longer ledger than you think." That night, Hazel crouched in the cold under the overpass and handed out 5 foil packets to 5 pairs of hands. Mr. Blue took his last, and for the first time in 4 months, he spoke. His voice was gravel that had forgotten how to move. "Why do you do this?" Hazel didn't look up. "Because somebody's gotta." She walked back toward the diner under a flickering yellow light, and she never saw the figure in the dark sedan parked half a block away, the man lowering a camera, writing a single word in a notebook, and underlining it twice. Her. 3 days after the night Mr. Blue finally spoke, Hazel's manager caught her at the pass window wrapping a tray of untouched meatloaf in foil. Todd Galloway was 31, soft in the middle, the kind of man who wore his uncle's last name like a borrowed suit. He crossed the kitchen in 4 strides and snatched the tray out of her hands. "Tell me this isn't what I think it is." Hazel kept her voice level. "It was marked for the dumpster, Todd." He held the foil up like evidence in a courtroom. "My dumpster. My inventory. You've been feeding that bum under the bridge on my dime for how long?" Danny looked up from the fryer. Mrs. Ruthie looked up from her coffee. The whole diner went quiet. Todd leaned in close enough that Hazel could smell the cologne he bought at the gas station. $40 off your check. And if I catch you one more time, you're done. You hear me, sweetheart?" She heard him. She didn't answer. She just untied her apron, hung it on the hook, went back out on the floor, and worked the rest of her shift with a smile that didn't reach anywhere near her eyes. That was Tuesday. On Wednesday, she came home to a pink slip taped to the apartment door. 3 weeks late. Pay by Friday or vacate by Monday. She took it down before her mother could see it and hid it in the same drawer where she kept the others. On Thursday, her mother's insulin ran out. Hazel walked to the pharmacy on Lorraine Avenue with her last $63 folded into her jeans pocket and stood at the counter while the young pharmacist typed, frowned, and typed again. "Ma'am, the price went up again this quarter. Same brand, same dose, same everything. It's $142 now." Hazel looked at the $63 in her hand and then at the insulin pen on the counter between them, and for one long second she felt her entire spine fold in on itself. Then she straightened. She put back the loaf of bread she'd been carrying. She put back the apples. She put back the eggs. She slid every last dollar across the counter, walked home in the cold with the insulin in her coat pocket, and ate half a granola bar for dinner so her mother could eat the other half and not ask questions. That was the week. That was the math. 3 weeks behind on rent, 1 mother on borrowed insulin, 1 $40 docking, $11 to her name. And still, on Friday night, Hazel Davenport stood in the back lot of Galloway's Diner at 11:47 p.m., holding 5 foil packets in a plastic grocery bag she had paid for out of her own pocket because the dumpster had nothing in it that night and she had bought the groceries herself at the Save-A-Lot on her break. She could have sold them. She could have eaten them. She walked 4 blocks in the cold instead, and she handed them out one by one under the West 25th Street overpass. And when she gave the last one to Mr. Blue, he looked up at her and said, quieter than before, "You shouldn't be doing this tonight." Hazel almost smiled. "How would you know what kind of night I'm having?" He didn't answer, but he held the foil packet in both hands like it was something holy, and he watched her walk away until she disappeared around the corner. He waited 5 minutes. Then he stood up, slowly because his knees hurt in the cold, and he walked 3 blocks east to a payphone that still worked outside a closed-down Rite Aid. He fed it a quarter he'd been saving for 2 weeks. He dialed a number he hadn't dialed in 7 years. A man's voice answered on the second ring, older, careful. "Pennington." The bearded man closed his eyes. "Arthur, it's me." There was a silence on the line so long it felt like a held breath. "Nathaniel, I need you to do something, quietly, for a woman who doesn't know I exist." 3 weeks passed, and Hazel did not know she was being watched. She kept her shifts. She paid half the rent with a loan from Mrs. Ruthie that she swore she'd pay back by the end of the month. She skipped meals. She brought food under the overpass 4 nights a week. And somewhere across the city, in a glass-walled office on the 42nd floor of the Whitmore Galloway Tower downtown, a silver-haired attorney named Arthur Pennington read a file on her every morning with his coffee. Bank statements, work history, a photograph of her holding her mother's hand outside a pharmacy on Lorraine Avenue. And every morning, he picked up the phone and called the same payphone outside the same closed-down Rite Aid at 7 a.m. sharp. And every morning, the bearded man on the other end said only one sentence. "Is she safe?" And every morning Pennington answered, "She's safe." And then the line went dead. On the 22nd day, Pennington's answer was different. "Nathaniel, I've seen enough. She is exactly what you said she was. It's time." There was a long pause on the line. Then the bearded man said, "Tonight, 11:52, under the overpass. And Arthur, don't let her be afraid." Which is how, at 11:52 p.m. on a Tuesday in late February, a black Escalade rolled to a stop at the corner of West 25th and Lorraine, just as Hazel Davenport was handing a foil packet to Miss Corrine. 2 men stepped out. The older one wore a cashmere coat that cost more than Hazel's car. He carried a photograph in a manila folder, and he walked straight past Miss Corrine, past Walter, past Tasha and Rico, and stopped in front of the bearded man in the navy jacket. He opened the folder. He held up the photograph. A young man, clean-shaven, in a graduation gown, maybe 25 years old. He looked from the photograph to the bearded man's face. His hands began to shake. "Sir, do you know who you really are?" The bearded man didn't answer. His eyes drifted past the lawyer and landed on Hazel, frozen 3 feet away, a foil-wrapped sandwich warm in her hand. Pennington followed his gaze. Then he turned to her, and his voice softened into something almost tender. "Miss Davenport, my name is Arthur Pennington. I'm an attorney with the firm of Pennington and Crow. I've been observing you for 22 days at the request of my client. I owe you an apology for that, and I owe you an explanation. But first, he gestured toward the bearded man, I believe it's time you met Mr. Nathaniel Whitmore, the missing heir of the Whitmore-Galloway pharmaceutical fortune, presumed dead 7 years ago, standing, as it happens, right in front of you. Hazel's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The bearded man, Nathaniel, finally spoke, and he spoke only to her. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you. I needed to be sure you were real. Real? That kindness like yours actually existed. That the world still made people like you. He took one step toward her. You saved my life 4 months ago. You saved it again every time you came back. And tonight I am going to try to save yours. Somewhere behind them, Miss Corinne unwrapped her foil packet and started eating, because a hungry woman does not wait for a miracle to finish. Pennington opened the back door of the Escalade. Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore Galloway is waiting, Miss Davenport. She would very much like to meet the woman who brought her son home. 6 days passed. Hazel didn't notice anything different, because people in her situation don't have the luxury of noticing. She worked a double Saturday. She paid half the rent with a borrowed $200 from Danny she swore she'd pay back by the 15th. She brought foil packets Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Mr. Blue took his portion each night without speaking, but she caught him twice, watching her walk away with an expression she couldn't read, something between grief and apology. Then came Tuesday, 11:52 p.m., late February, snow cutting sideways under the yellow sodium light. Hazel knelt and handed out the 5 foil packets. Miss Corinne first, Walter, Tasha, Rico, Mr. Blue last. She was just straightening up when headlights flared at the end of the block, 2 beams cutting through the snow, and a black Escalade rolled to a slow stop 10 feet from where she stood. Hazel's stomach dropped. You don't work the west side of Cleveland at midnight without learning what a car like that means on a street like this. She stepped back. Her hand went instinctively for the pepper spray clipped to her apron. Miss Corinne grabbed Walter's sleeve. Rico pushed Tasha behind him. But the man who stepped out of the back seat wasn't who any of them expected. He was 60-something, silver-haired, wearing a wool overcoat that cost more than Hazel's rent. He held a manila folder in his gloved hands like it was made of glass. He looked at the 5 huddled figures under the overpass, and then his gaze locked absolutely on the bearded man in the navy jacket. For a long moment, Arthur Pennington could not speak. His eyes filled. He took 1 step forward, then another, then opened the folder and held up a photograph. A younger man, clean-shaven, smiling on a sailboat in a blue summer. "Sir," he said, and his voice cracked on the word, "do you know who you really are?" The bearded man didn't answer. His eyes drifted past the lawyer, past the photograph, and landed on Hazel, frozen, the empty plastic grocery bag still in her hand. He nodded at her once, slowly, as if apologizing for something she didn't yet know had happened. Then he stood up from the concrete and he said in a voice Hazel had never heard him use, steady, educated, tired in a way no street could explain, "Hello, Arthur. It took you long enough." Pennington let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He turned to Hazel. "Miss Davenport, my name is Arthur Pennington. I'm an attorney. I've been watching you for 3 weeks on this man's instruction. I owe you an explanation, and my employer owes you considerably more than that. Would you do us the honor of getting in the car?" Hazel looked at the Escalade. She looked at Mr. Blue, who was not, it was becoming horribly clear, anyone she had ever actually met. She looked at Miss Corinne and Walter and Tasha and Rico, who were staring at her with expressions that would stay with her the rest of her life. Then she looked back at the bearded man. "What's your real name?" He met her eyes. For the first time in 4 months, he did not look away. "Nathaniel Whitmore." The name meant nothing to Hazel. But somewhere 2 blocks behind them, a streetlight flickered over the shuttered storefront of a pharmacy that had been overcharging her mother for insulin for 15 years, and the logo painted on the window read, in faded gold letters, Whitmore Galloway. Hazel got in the car. The Escalade climbed east out of the west side, crossed the Cuyahoga, and kept climbing, through University Circle, past Shaker Square, up into streets Hazel had only ever seen from the window of the number 48 bus on her way to clean houses in the summers of her teens. Mansions set back behind stone walls, trees older than the city itself. She sat in the back seat with her apron still tied around her waist because nobody had told her to take it off, and she did not know what the protocol was for a woman like her riding in a car like this. Nathaniel sat across from her, looking out the window like a man seeing a country he had been exiled from. Pennington sat up front and spoke softly into a phone. "Yes, ma'am. She's with us. She's everything you hoped she would be." The gate of the Whitmore Galloway estate opened before the Escalade even slowed. Gravel hissed under the tires. A butler was already at the front steps holding the door, and behind him, in the foyer under a chandelier the size of Hazel's kitchen table, stood a woman who did not need to introduce herself for Hazel to understand exactly who she was looking at. Eleanor Whitmore Galloway was 72 years old, silver-haired, and standing perfectly straight in a charcoal dress with a single strand of pearls. She had the kind of face that had watched men lie to her for 50 years and catalogued every one of them. When she saw Nathaniel step into the foyer, she did not move for a full 5 seconds. Then she walked, slowly, deliberately, across the marble, took her grandson's face in both hands, and pressed her forehead to his without making a sound. No sobbing, no wailing. Just 2 people standing very still while 7 years collapsed into a single breath. When she finally stepped back, she turned to Hazel. And Hazel, who had been braced for pity or for polite distance, or for the quiet condescension of rich white women in department stores, was not braced for what Eleanor actually did, which was to walk across the foyer, take Hazel's hand in both of hers, and say, with a voice that had commanded boardrooms on 3 continents, "Miss Davenport, welcome to my home. Please forgive me for every day of the last 11 months that I did not know you existed." Hazel's throat closed. She didn't trust herself to speak. Eleanor led her, not to some grand drawing room, but to the library, warm, wood-paneled, a fire going because it was February and old houses remembered the cold. A tray of tea and sandwiches was already waiting. Eleanor poured 2 cups herself. She did not ring for a servant. She did not perform. She handed Hazel a saucer of Earl Grey, sat down across from her, and began, quietly, to tell a story. "7 years ago," she said, "my grandson discovered something about our family's pharmaceutical holdings that he could not live with. He went to his uncle, my late husband's brother, Preston Galloway, with what he found. Preston threatened him, discredited him, had him followed. A week later, my grandson's empty canoe was recovered on the Chagrin River.
I buried a son I did not have a body for. I have grieved him every morning for 7 years." She set down her cup.
3 weeks ago, Arthur received a phone call from a payphone in Cleveland. My grandson asked him to locate a woman who had been feeding him and 4 others under an overpass on the west side. He asked Arthur to verify that this woman was real, not a plant, not a con, just real. Arthur verified, and tonight, at my grandson's request, we came for him and for you. Hazel found her voice. "Ma'am, I didn't do anything. I just gave out food that was gonna get thrown away." Eleanor looked at her over the rim of her cup. "Miss Davenport, my grandson watched you buy groceries with your own tips on the nights the dumpster was empty. My attorney watched you hand over every dollar in your wallet for your mother's insulin and walk home in the cold eating half a granola bar. Do not tell me you did nothing." Hazel looked at her hands. Eleanor set down her cup, folded her own hands in her lap, and delivered, quietly, without flourish, the way other women deliver verdicts. "Kindness without a witness is the only kind that counts." The fire popped in the grate. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Then Eleanor opened a leather folder on the side table and laid out, one at a time, 3 documents. "I would like to offer you 3 things, and I would like you to hear all 3 before you answer. The first is a position at the Whitmore Galloway Foundation as community liaison for our Cleveland initiatives. Salary, $85,000 a year, with full benefits and a relocation allowance should you choose to use it. The second is a scholarship, 4 years at any university in the state of Ohio that will accept you. The third is the deed to a 3-bedroom house in Tremont already paid for, which you and your mother may occupy for the rest of her natural life or yours, whichever is longer." Hazel could not breathe. Eleanor watched her carefully. "You are under no obligation to accept any of it, but I would be profoundly grateful if you did." Hazel looked at the documents. She looked at the fire. She looked at Nathaniel sitting very still in the chair by the window, waiting. And when she finally spoke, her voice was small but steady. "Mrs. Whitmore, ma'am, before I say yes to any of this, I need to ask you something. My mother has been paying $142 a month for insulin. She was paying $60 2 years ago. Same dose, same brand. Can you tell me why?" The room went very still. Eleanor's eyes sharpened, not at Hazel, but past her, at some memory Hazel could not see. She set down her cup with a click that sounded, in the quiet library, like a gavel. "Child," she said softly, "you just asked the right question." She turned to Pennington, who had been standing by the door the entire time. "Arthur, pull every Cleveland regional pricing file we have, all of them, tonight." Pennington was already reaching for his phone, and Hazel Davenport, still in her diner uniform, with her apron tied around her waist, sat in a library that smelled like cedar and old books, and understood for the first time in her life that she had just walked through a door that was never going to close behind her. The first week after that night felt to Hazel like somebody had handed her a life that belonged to another woman and told her to try it on. The house in Tremont was real. 3 bedrooms, a kitchen with a window that actually closed, a pharmacy down the street that handed over Loretta's insulin for a $20 copay without blinking, because a phone call had been made from a number Hazel did not have the clearance to know. Loretta stood in the new kitchen the first morning, holding her insulin pen in one hand and a carton of eggs in the other. And for the first time since Hazel's father died, she cried. Quiet, ugly, honest crying. The kind a person does when they stop having to be strong. On Wednesday, Hazel walked into Galloway's diner one last time, untied her apron in front of Todd Galloway, and set it on the counter between them. Todd looked at the apron, then at Hazel, then at the Lincoln Town car idling at the curb outside. "You'll be back," he said. "Girls like you always come back." Hazel smiled, not cruelly, just honestly. "Todd, honey, you don't know what kind of girl I am." Mrs. Ruthie hugged her at the door, hard enough to bruise. Danny slipped her a paper bag with a slice of lemon pie inside. She walked out into the cold without looking back. On Friday night, she cooked meatloaf in her new kitchen. Loretta sat at the table. Nathaniel, clean-shaven now, in a soft gray sweater, looking 10 years younger than he had under the overpass, sat across from her. He cut a piece, put it in his mouth, chewed slowly, and closed his eyes. "This is the best meal I've had in 7 years." Hazel laughed. "Nathaniel, it's the same meatloaf." He opened his eyes. "I know. That's what I mean." Loretta looked between them across the candlelight, and for the first time in longer than Hazel could remember, her mother's eyes were not tired. The world, briefly, felt kind. It was the last week any of them would feel that way for a long time. On Monday morning, Hazel walked into the Whitmore Galloway Foundation's downtown office for her first day, wearing a navy blazer Eleanor's assistant had sent over the night before. She didn't see the man with the camera across the street. She didn't see him until Tuesday, when she opened the Cleveland Plain Dealer on the break-room table and saw her own face on page 3, snapped mid-laugh in front of the foundation building, framed next to a photograph of Nathaniel stepping out of a town car. The headline read, "Mystery Waitress Takes Six-Figure Job with Grieving Whitmore Heir. Family Insiders Question Timing." The article quoted an anonymous source close to the family who described Hazel as a woman who had positioned herself near Nathaniel for months before his identity was revealed. There was no byline worth a damn. There didn't need to be. By noon, the story was on every local news site in Ohio. By evening, a cousin Hazel had never met, Vincent Galloway, Preston's son, Todd's older brother, was on a Channel 5 segment calling her, with a practiced sorrow, a very sophisticated opportunist. Hazel's phone did not stop ringing. Her mother's phone did not stop ringing. A woman who introduced herself as a Columbus Dispatch reporter called twice and then showed up at the new house in Tremont, knocking on the door until Loretta pulled the curtains and turned off every light. By Wednesday morning, a journalist, a woman in her 40s with a blazer and a laminated press pass that looked a little too new, called Hazel's work phone and asked if she'd be willing to meet at a cafe downtown to tell her side of the story. Hazel, exhausted, said yes. The cafe was on East 9th Street. The woman was already seated when Hazel arrived. So were 2 men in dark suits Hazel had never seen. And sitting at the head of the table with a cup of black coffee and a crocodile's patience was a man Hazel also had never seen in person, but whose face she recognized from the oil portrait hanging above the mantel of Eleanor's library. Preston Galloway was 68, tall, thin, silver at the temples, wearing the kind of suit that did not come off a rack. He didn't stand when Hazel entered. He gestured to the chair across from him the way a man gestures to a dog. "Miss Davenport, please, sit." Hazel sat because she was already there, and walking out would have looked like guilt. Preston slid a single sheet of paper across the table, then a second, then a check.
The first document is a non-disclosure agreement. The second is a resignation letter from your new position at the foundation, pre-drafted. The check is $250,000. You sign both documents. You cash the check. You never speak to my nephew, my sister-in-law, or any member of this family again. You go back to your life, Miss Davenport, with, I might add, considerably more money than you have ever seen.
Hazel looked at the check. $250,000. More money than her mother had earned in 40 years of work. Preston watched her face carefully.
I'll be frank with you, Miss Davenport. My nephew is unstable. He has been unstable for 7 years. My sister-in-law is 72 years old and grieving women attach themselves to dramatic narratives. I don't blame her. I don't blame you. I'm offering you a way out of a story that is going to end badly for you, because stories like this always end badly for people like you. Take the money. Feed your mother. Buy yourself a small business. Be sensible.
Hazel folded her hands on the table. She was aware very clearly that her pulse was loud in her ears. She was also aware that she was not afraid. "Mr. Galloway, can I ask you one question before I answer?" Preston smiled thinly. "By all means."
My mama's been paying $142 a month for insulin. Same insulin she paid $60 for 2 years ago. Same brand, same dose. I asked your sister-in-law about that last week. She told me she'd look into it. Can you tell me, since you're offering to solve all my problems today, can you tell me why the price went up? The air in the cafe changed. Preston's smile didn't move, but something behind his eyes did. "Miss Davenport, I don't know anything about retail pharmacy pricing. I'm an executive, not a cashier." "That's funny," Hazel said, "because the pharmacy that overcharged my mother for 15 years has your family's name on the window." For the first time, Preston leaned back. The two men in suits exchanged a glance. The woman with the laminated press pass suddenly became very interested in her phone. Preston spoke slowly. "Miss Davenport, I would strongly advise you to sign the papers." Hazel stood up. She slid the check, the NDA, and the resignation letter back across the table, lined up neatly, like a waitress returning 3 plates that had come back wrong. "Mr. Galloway, I fed your nephew meatloaf for 11 months, while your family sat in a mansion thinking he was dead. I walked 4 blocks in the snow to do it, on nights I couldn't afford groceries for myself. I'm not a sophisticated opportunist. I'm a tired waitress with a mama who needs insulin. And I'm not signing a goddamn thing." She walked out of the cafe. She didn't cry until she got to her car. That night, somebody broke into the house in Tremont. Nothing was stolen. The front door was pried open, the kitchen drawers pulled out, Loretta's insulin pens removed from the refrigerator and lined up neatly on the counter like little plastic soldiers. A message with no words, because the message didn't need any. Loretta stood in the kitchen at 2 a.m. with her hands shaking, and Hazel, for the first time in her life, locked herself in the bathroom,
sat down on the cold tile, and sobbed into a folded towel so her mother would not hear her break. She held the insulin pen in her hand the whole time. And somewhere in the city, in a mansion library she had been in exactly once, Eleanor Whitmore Galloway received a phone call at 2:17 a.m. from Arthur Pennington, and she smiled, for the first time in 3 decades, a very small and very dangerous smile. "They've made a mistake," Eleanor said. Finally. Eleanor's car arrived at the house in Tremont at 6 a.m. Hazel had not slept. Loretta was sitting at the kitchen table in her robe, a cup of tea going cold in front of her, insulin pens still lined up where the intruder had left them. Eleanor walked in, took one look at the pens, and did something Hazel would remember for the rest of her life. She crossed the kitchen, sat down next to Loretta, and took the older woman's hand in both of hers. "Mrs. Davenport, I am so sorry. This is my family's doing, and I am going to end it today." Loretta studied Eleanor's face for a long moment. Then she nodded once, the way women who have survived things nod when they recognize another survivor. "Mrs. Whitmore, you do what you need to do. My girl and we've been ready for a fight our whole lives." They drove back to the estate. Pennington was already waiting in the library with 3 boxes of printouts stacked on the mahogany table. Regional pharmacy pricing files going back 15 years, pulled overnight from Foundation archives Preston didn't know existed. Nathaniel was standing by the window. He turned when Hazel walked in, and there was something new in his face, something that hadn't been there under the overpass or at the candlelit meatloaf dinner,
Or in any moment Hazel had known him. He looked, for the first time, ready.
"Hazel," he said, "I need to show you something." He walked over to the table, picked up the old navy jacket he had been wearing the night the escalade came, the one Eleanor had been unable to throw away, and laid it flat. From a small leather case, he took a seam ripper. Carefully, he opened the lining along the inside of the left breast. From the lining, he withdrew a USB drive wrapped in 3 layers of plastic and taped shut.
7 years, he said quietly. Every cold night, every rainstorm, every time I thought about giving up, I kept this alive, because I knew someday somebody would give me a reason to come back and use it. He looked at Hazel. "You gave me the reason." Pennington took the drive with hands that were not quite steady and plugged it into a laptop. The files opened. 15 years of internal pricing memos, offshore routing numbers, forged signatures, Eleanor's husband's signature lifted and reused after his death. A full paper trail of Preston Galloway's insulin markup scheme funneled through a Cayman shell company and laundered back as consulting fees to a handful of executives, Vincent Galloway among them. The scope of it took even Eleanor's breath. 8 figures, Arthur? 8 figures, Eleanor, at minimum. Hazel stood looking at a spreadsheet on the screen. One column was her mother's zip code. One of the thousands of line items was a recurring monthly charge, escalating year over year, tagged to a patient account number Hazel recognized from the top of every pharmacy receipt she had carried home for a decade. She sat down on the edge of a leather chair. "My mama," she said. "My mama is on this list." Nathaniel knelt down in front of her. "Hazel, your mother is one of 9,300 people on that list, in Cleveland alone.
Hazel put her face in her hands. Eleanor walked over to the intercom on the wall and pressed the button. "Arthur, call Elise Holloway at the Attorney General's office. Tell her we have what she's been waiting 15 years for. Tell her I want a federal prosecutor in my library by noon, and I want the indictment filed before sundown." By 11:30, Elise Holloway was in the library. 41, sharp, the kind of prosecutor who had been quietly circling the Whitmore-Galloway regional holdings for most of her career without ever getting close enough to file. She reviewed the drive. She reviewed the paper trail. She looked up at Eleanor and said only, "This is it. This is everything." Eleanor nodded. "I know. I've known for 30 years, Elise. I just didn't have proof. Until now." Then Eleanor turned to Hazel, and her voice softened for the first time all morning. "Child, I need to ask you something, and I need you to know you can say no. My brother-in-law needs to be confronted in a room where he cannot run. I am hosting a family dinner tomorrow night at the estate. I would like you to sit at my right hand, not as an employee, not as a witness, as the reason this is happening at all. Will you come?" Hazel looked at her mother, who had come in quietly and was standing in the doorway. Loretta nodded. Hazel looked back at Eleanor. "Ma'am, I'll come, and I'll wear black." The family dinner was set for 7 o'clock on Thursday evening. Eleanor had personally called Preston at 2 that afternoon, her voice tired and careful, suggesting they finally sit down as a family and discuss Nathaniel's reintegration and the question of Miss Davenport. Preston had smiled on the other end of the line, Eleanor could hear it, and accepted within 30 seconds. He arrived at 6:58 with Vincent at his side and 2 corporate lawyers flanking them. All 4 men wearing the expression of people who believed they were walking into a negotiation they had already won. The dining room at the Whitmore-Galloway estate could seat 20. Tonight, it seated 8. Eleanor at the head. Nathaniel to her left, clean-shaven, in a charcoal suit that fit him like a second skin now that he had earned it back. Hazel at Eleanor's right, in a simple black dress, her mother's pearl earrings, Loretta had pressed them into her hand that morning, catching the candlelight. Pennington at the far end. Preston, Vincent, and the 2 lawyers filled the remaining chairs across from Hazel. Preston didn't bother to hide his amusement when he saw her. "Eleanor, I see the help is eating with us tonight." Eleanor didn't look up from her wine. "Preston, sit down. You're about to lose everything you stole." Preston laughed, a short, sharp, incredulous laugh. "Excuse me?" Eleanor raised one finger. From a panel behind her, a projection screen descended silently from the ceiling. Pennington pressed a button on the small remote beside his plate. The first slide came up. It was a scanned copy of a 2011 internal pricing memo authorizing a quarterly insulin markup across the Whitmore-Galloway regional pharmacy chain. The signature at the bottom was Eleanor's late husband's, except Eleanor's husband had been dead for 4 months when the memo was dated. At the bottom of the slide, in red, a forensic document examiner's certification. Signature forged, high confidence. Pressure pattern inconsistent with known decedent exemplars. Preston's face did not change, but his hand, resting on his wine glass, stilled. The second slide. Offshore account routing numbers, Cayman, then Panama, then a shell company registered in Delaware called Galloway Consulting Holdings, with a board of exactly 3 people, Preston, Vincent, and a CFO who had vanished from public life in 2019. The third slide, a video deposition. The vanished CFO, alive, speaking from an undisclosed location, looking directly into the camera. I was instructed by Preston Galloway, beginning in 2010, to structure the insulin pricing mechanism across the regional chain in a way that would appear market compliant to external audit while funneling the surplus between 14 and 31% above legitimate supplier cost into Galloway Consulting Holdings, which then redistributed those funds as consulting fees to Preston Galloway, Vincent Galloway, and 4 senior executives. The total diverted sum, as of my departure,
Exceeded $83 million.
Vincent made a sound like a man being punched in the stomach. Preston stood up.
This is...
"Sit down, Preston," Eleanor said. Preston sat. "This is inadmissible," one of his lawyers tried. "This is a private family dinner. Any recording, Mr. Halloran," Eleanor said without looking at him, "kindly save your breath." "Arthur?" Pennington stood. He walked to the double doors at the far end of the dining room and opened them. Elise Holloway, Assistant Attorney General for the state of Ohio, stepped into the dining room flanked by 2 federal agents in dark jackets with yellow letters across the back. She was holding a stack of papers in one hand. She looked at Preston with no particular emotion at all. "Preston Galloway. Vincent Galloway. My office filed a federal indictment at 6 p.m. this evening in the Northern District of Ohio, charging both of you with wire fraud, securities fraud, conspiracy, and violations of the federal healthcare anti-kickback statute. 14 counts each. I have warrants. You are both under arrest. Agents, please." Vincent tried to stand. One of the agents was already behind his chair. Vincent sat back down very carefully and put his hands flat on the table. His eyes were wet. Preston didn't move. He looked instead across the table at Hazel. His mouth curled into something that was not a smile. "You," he said, "a nobody waitress from the West Side. You did this." Hazel set down her wine glass. She looked at him, really looked, for the first time since he had slid a check across a cafe table and called her a sophisticated opportunist. And she spoke quietly enough that every person in the room had to lean in to hear her. "Mr. Galloway, I'm not a nobody. I'm the person who fed your nephew when your family wouldn't. My mama paid you $142 a month for 15 years so you could buy yourself a Delaware shell company and a second home in Aspen. That's not nothing. That's everything. And I'd do it again tomorrow." Preston stared at her. Then the agent put the handcuffs on him, and Preston Galloway walked out of his sister-in-law's dining room for the last time, past the oil portrait of the husband whose signature he had forged, and into the back of a federal vehicle in the circular drive. By 8 the next morning, every major news outlet in the country was running the story. The Plain Dealer had pulled the hit piece from 2 weeks earlier. In its place was a photograph Eleanor had personally selected from the Foundation's files. Hazel at the diner, mid-laugh, pouring coffee for Mrs. Ruthie, under a headline that read simply, "The Waitress Who Brought a Dynasty Down." The class action lawsuit was filed within a week. The judge ordered full restitution across all 9,300 affected patients in the Cleveland region alone, with a national rollout to follow. Checks began arriving by mail in the middle of April. Loretta Davenport opened hers at the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning. The amount was $47,000 and change. She read it twice. She looked up at her daughter, who was standing in the kitchen doorway in her foundation blazer with her car keys in her hand, about to leave for work. Neither woman said anything for a long time. Then Loretta laid the check on the table very carefully and whispered, more to herself than to Hazel, "God keeps a longer ledger."
Hazel crossed the kitchen. She knelt down next to her mother's chair, the way she used to kneel in the cold under the West 25th Street overpass, and she laid her head in her mother's lap. Loretta put her hand on her daughter's hair. Neither of them cried. They had done enough of that already.
1 year later, on a warm morning in early April, the diner at the corner of West 25th and Lorraine reopened under a new sign. The old one, Galloway's in chipped red letters, had been taken down in June. The new one, painted in clean white on navy blue, read simply, Ruthie's. Mrs. Ruthie herself cut the ribbon because the foundation had bought the building, kept every employee, fired Todd Galloway by certified mail, and named the place after the regular who had tipped Hazel 3/4 at a time for 6 years. Danny Brennan ran the kitchen now. He had a raise. He had health insurance. He had a line outside the door most Sundays. Hazel did not work there anymore. She ran the Whitmore Galloway Foundation's Cleveland Community Health Initiative out of a small office on Prospect Avenue. Insulin at cost for every qualifying patient in a 6-county area. Expansion into prenatal care in the fall. A scholarship program in Loretta Davenport's name. Her mother had insisted the name not be Hazel's, that sent 4 West Side kids to nursing school every year. On the wall of Hazel's office, framed plain, was a single photograph, a foil-wrapped sandwich under a yellow overpass light. No caption. She told the story only when asked. Nathaniel had not taken the CEO chair. He ran the Foundation's Veterans Outreach Program, the one he had started in his 2nd month back, because he could not stop seeing the navy jackets on the street. Miss Corinne cut hair at a new community salon funded through that program. Walter had 6 months sober and an apartment. Tasha and Rico had their daughter back from Tasha's sister. The whiskey bottle Walter had carried for 2 years sat unopened on a shelf in his kitchen. A trophy nobody else would have recognized as one. On a Sunday afternoon in the library where it had all started, Eleanor handed Hazel a small velvet box. Inside was an old silver locket with a photograph of a young Nathaniel on a sailboat. Eleanor closed Hazel's fingers around it. "Keep it, child. You're the one who brought him home." Hazel shook her head slowly. "Ma'am, I didn't bring him home. I just made sure he ate." Eleanor smiled, the small, dangerous smile she had smiled once before, at 2 in the morning on a bad February night. "Child, same thing." That evening, on her way home, Hazel stopped at the West 25th Street overpass. There was a new man there, younger, thin, wrapped in a coat that didn't fit. Hazel handed him a foil-wrapped sandwich from her passenger seat. "Eat before it gets cold." She didn't ask his name. She never does. The yellow sodium light under the West 25th Street overpass still flickers at midnight. Hazel Davenport still stops there some nights on her way home from the Foundation office, still hands a foil-wrapped sandwich to whoever happens to be sitting on the concrete that week, still walks away before they can thank her. Some habits, it turns out, are not habits at all. They are who you are. Eleanor Whitmore Galloway is 73 now. She keeps an old silver locket on her desk and a photograph of a laughing black waitress pouring coffee for an old woman framed beside it. Nathaniel cooks meatloaf for Loretta Davenport on Sunday nights. The fridge in the house in Tremont is never empty anymore. The world kept turning. Most of it never noticed what had happened in a Cleveland dining room on a Thursday in February. The people it mattered to noticed. That was enough.